In this video, we are going to take a brief look at survey research and survey construction. Survey research involves systematically asking participants questions about their experiences, opinions, thoughts, feelings, and so forth. Survey research often involves administering a questionnaire, also known as a survey, to a group of people and then looking for trends in the data. When researchers administer the questionnaire once to a single sample of participants, this is called a cross-sectional survey design. Cross-sectional surveys allow researchers to get a snapshot of a sample of participants. If the participants have been carefully selected, either randomly from the entire population or else systematically to represent the population, and if the sample is large, then researchers may be able to draw conclusions about the population's experiences at that moment in time. For example, think about political polls, questionnaires for marketing purposes, or even student course evaluations. In each case, people respond to a survey, and then the person administering the survey calculates what percentage of surveyed voters plan to vote for this candidate or that candidate, how surveyed consumers rate various products, or the average effectiveness score that students assign to their professor. In each case, the person administering the survey wants to know, how do you feel about such and such, or how likely are you to do this or that? The key to constructing a survey is to carefully think through what you want to know about your participants, and then craft survey questions that will gather that information. Survey questions need to be crystal clear and not left open to too much interpretation on participants' part. Each survey question should ask about a single thing. The survey should ideally include a mixture of open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. Open-ended questions require participants to generate their own response, usually with more than just one or two words. Open-ended questions produce qualitative data, typically text. Closed-ended questions require participants to choose from among a few possible responses that have been predetermined by the researcher. These closed-ended questions produce quantitative data, that is, numeric data. One common area for closed-ended questions is participant demographics. For example, what is your gender and what is your current teaching assignment, followed by a series of choices, would both be closed-ended questions. Note that some closed-ended questions technically do not provide response options, but nonetheless provide quantitative data. For example, the question, how many students do you typically teach in a semester, requires participants to type in a response, but their response is brief and quantifiable. The same thing is true of other very short answer questions, such as yes or no questions, or questions that produce 1 to 2 word answers. In both cases, you can calculate the number of people who responded each way, also called the frequency, and then calculate each frequency's percentage of the total number of participants. Another example of a closed-ended question asks participants to indicate their experience on a rating scale, with responses ranging from none to extensive, for example. The assumption is that participants interpret the points on the rating scale consistently, so the average rating or the percentage of participants who reported a particular rating can be calculated. In this example of a survey, the researcher asks participants to indicate the extent to which they have received formal training and/or professional development on online teaching and learning. Note that the researcher has provided descriptions at the low end of the scale, none, this is completely new to me, and at the high end of the scale, extensive, I have a degree or other certification in instructional or educational technology. These are called anchors and can help increase consistency in participants' interpretation of the response options. With rating scales, it is possible to calculate the group's average response, though be careful, if you have a small sample and/or several responses at both ends of the scale, the average might not accurately reflect the sample's typical response to that question. In that case, frequencies and percentages are a better option. Yet another example of a closed-ended question type is called a Likert scale question. A Likert scale typically includes 5 possible choices: strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree or neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. Here is an example. I feel confident teaching my students online. participants are presented with one or more statements and have to indicate the extent to which they agree or disagree with this statement. For Likert scale questions, the researcher can calculate the frequency of each type of response to a question. For example, the researcher might want to know how many people said they strongly agree that they feel confident teaching their students online, how many said that they agree, and so forth. Another option for Likert scales is to combine the strongly agree and agree responses, and to combine the strongly disagree and disagree options. Neutral options can stand alone or be included with one of the other two groupings, depending on the researcher's interest and the nature of the question. Once frequencies have been calculated, the researcher can once again calculate the percentage of the total sample who responded in each way. Frequencies, percentages, and averages are all quantitative results that indicate the general trends or typical responses of the sample. In contrast, open-ended questions require participants to respond in their own words. They typically start with phrases like, "Describe your experience with," or "What are some," or "Tell us about," which are designed to capture more detail and depth of response. Here is an example. What are the main benefits of online education in K-12 settings? Note that this question cannot be answered in just one or two words and does not require participants to choose from a limited number of response options. Instead, the participant must consider their own experience and generate a response. Responses to open-ended questions produce qualitative data. Qualitative data are typically not quantified, but instead are reviewed, coded, and then summarized according to common themes that emerge. For this example of benefits of online education, perhaps participants' responses focus on things like flexibility, safety, and personal growth opportunities. The researcher could note that these three themes were present in the data and give examples of a response or two that illustrates each theme. There is one more aspect to include when constructing a survey: an informed consent statement. In online surveys that provide participants with anonymity, a signed statement of informed consent is usually not required. However, researchers should describe what the study is about and what participation involves, explain any risks and benefits, describe the limits of confidentiality, or, if no limits, indicate that responses will be kept confidential, and state that completing the survey constitutes consent.